Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I hope you are enjoying your weekend. In breaking news, as I record this, China has announced that it is conducting, quote, live fire training missions, end quote, today, Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Beijing time, in waters off the coast of Fujian province, opposite Taiwan. It is believed that this is in response to a possible visit from US lawmaker Pelosi to Taipei. Okay, first up, China is suffering a massive heat wave these last few weeks, and while other parts of the world are also weathering Ra's lashes, the intensity of the heat this year in China is at record levels for the country, being hotter, longer and more widespread than in the past, introducing concerns about energy, food security and some parts of the economy. According to the National Meteorological Center, during daylight hours this week, most parts of southern China, more than 300 cities, experienced temperatures of over 35 degrees Celsius. Temperatures in parts of Zhejiang, Jiangxi, Hunan and Xinjiang surpassed 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. More than 900 million people, about 65% of the population, were under some form of heat warning this week, while many regions posted red alerts, the highest heat alarm level. The National Meteorological Center advised the public to avoid outdoor activities during these high temperature periods. The China Southern Power Grid Company said that Monday's usage this week had surpassed last year's peak load by 3%. In Guangdong province, the power grid also hit a record high, almost 5% over last year's peak. Every additional degree of heat requires as much as 5 gigawatts of extra capacity. This week saw outages in some parts of the country as demand for air conditioning strains the electrical grid. But these disruptions were modest. According to the National Meteorological Center, the heat wave is expected to continue in the south of the country for at least another 7 to 10 days, with temperatures reaching 40 degrees Celsius or higher. And of course, this will mean more than just extra AC usage. The heat wave touches on energy security and logistics issues too. The China Electricity Council, in a half-yearly report released yesterday, Friday, forecast that nationwide power demand will rise 7% in the second half of this year versus a year ago, and this has been driven by a jump in infrastructure spending to support an economy dragged down by a housing crisis and zero-COVID policy. The heat wave is thus exacerbating an already challenging situation for power generation at a time when, due to global conditions, energy prices are higher. The China Electricity Council expects periodic shortages during this peak demand period over the summer and has called on the government to release 300 million tons of new coal capacity as soon as possible. Import subsidies were also recommended. After last year's painful power shortages, Beijing already has expanding coal mining and processing projects in the works, combining energy security priorities with infrastructure spending needs. 20 coal mining projects, for example, were okayed by the central government earlier this year. Food security has also been affected by the historic heat. Rice crops and fruit and vegetables in southern China are at risk of being damaged by the heat, and melting glaciers are causing floods in cotton-growing regions in the west of the country, though analysts argue that so far the risks and damage are both manageable. What is less manageable, however, is the deepening housing crisis, which we will cover next. If you guys are enjoying the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It's a huge help. And for anybody who wants to go the extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable, it's just me making these episodes. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. There are a lot of moving parts to the housing crisis in China now, something typical of any crisis, systemic in nature. It's more than just liquidity and insolvency issues for developers and their lenders, but a demand-side crisis too, with household confidence sliding faster than home prices, as well as a financial concern with the mortgage boycott putting strain on China's banking system. The housing crisis has also brought to the surface the ongoing friction between central and local government over revenue and spending obligations, an aspect of national governance that touches on the sensitivities of local elites and entrenched interests. At a televised meeting this week, China's banking regulator said it would support local governments in ensuring that delayed property projects can be completed. Without elaborating on banking, it said it will support the issuance of local government debt in bolstering capital at smaller banks as part of a broader plan to mitigate bad loans at such banks. Quote, Beijing says that local governments are responsible for fixing the property woes in their own markets. I expect we'll continue to see rising conflict between Beijing and local governments over how the costs of adjustment and rebalancing will be allocated. End quote. Yesterday we discussed a government-backed bailout fund for developers to complete apartments across the country, and we touched on concerns that it likely won't be enough to rescue the sector more broadly. It's increasingly clear, though, that the bailout likely is only intended to prevent social instability by getting pre-purchased buildings finished. Policymakers understand that a few $100 billion will do little to revive a housing sector that by some measures accounts for 1/5 to up to 1/3 of the Chinese economy. Quote, the so-called bailout will only focus on protecting home buyers and ensuring social stability. Developers would likely be an afterthought. End quote. The mortgage boycott crisis, though not as devastating as the challenges with an over-leveraged development sector on the supply side, nevertheless presents a risky challenge for policymakers trying to maintain social stability and prevent a full-blown banking crisis. According to data from China Real Estate Information Corp, as of July 19th, at least 230 housing developments in at least 80 cities were affected by the mortgage boycott movement. A common complaint from home buyers is that their mortgage payments have not been deposited in the proper escrow accounts, and that these funds are being misappropriated by cash-strapped developers for other uses. Quote, the causes driving the boycotts are important because of the risks they pose to China's ailing real estate industry, which is estimated to contribute about 25% of the economy via direct and indirect channels, and because 1/3 of government revenue is linked to the sector. End quote. Analysts with Caixin write that although developers in many countries are allowed to sell homes before they finish building them, the practice in China is special in two ways. First, home buyers have to pay in full when they decide to buy, and this has helped developers raise cash quickly and rapidly, and arguably recklessly, and thus allowing these developers to expand very quickly. Second, until recently, Chinese developers had been allowed to use the bulk of their pre-sale revenue for whatever they wanted. The Caixin analysts write that although China has laws and regulations requiring developers to set aside enough money to finish construction on their housing projects, local governments and banks had allowed them to sidestep some of these rules, including the requirement that pre-sale funds must be deposited into government-supervised escrow accounts. Quote, analysts predict that the wave of mortgage boycotts will further disrupt the already fragile property market. During the last 2 weeks, through July 17th, new home sales in 30 major cities dropped 41% and 12% in terms of floor space from the previous week. Still, some don't think the issue will trigger a banking crisis because risky mortgages only make up a small share of the total in China. End quote. A recent Goldman Sachs report agrees that currently the issue is relatively small, but warns of a negative feedback loop if policymakers fail to restore confidence in the property market. Quote, if left on its own, more home buyers will stop paying mortgages, further straining property developers' cash flows, which in turn could lead to more construction delays and project halts. End quote. It is this, it warns, which turns manageable crises into unmanageable ones. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you all on Monday.